Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. Before we go to today's guest, Professor Mark Meirowitz, here is your JPC commercial. So people ask me why, as we are well into our third year of webinar programming, and so many of you come back so often, why we're still doing the commercial. Thank you for asking, because it allows me to brag in two different ways. First of all, about the JPC and our work. And secondly, to say that there are new people with us every week, every time we do this. That's great. And you, by the way, can always send your webinar invitation to your friends and help us expand the circle. So the commercial. The JPC was established in 1985 as a 501c3 organization, providing analysis of both foreign and domestic policies. You can find us on our website at jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our insight articles. You can read our magazine In Focus quarterly. By the way, the spring issue is up right now for In Focus. It's our Israel issue. And I have to tell you, I think it's one of the best issues we've done. Granted, I'm prejudiced, but I think it is a really great issue. So jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. You would think we have a staff of dozens and dozens of people. We don't. We work big on a small budget. A reminder as we get into the program, send your questions on the Q&A function we're monitoring. And now our guest, Dr. Mark Meirowitz is a professor of humanities at the Maritime College of the State University of New York. He teaches American history, foreign policy, and the Constitution. He holds a PhD in political science from Fordham University and a JD from Brooklyn Law School. His domestically oriented classes include the Supreme Court and the Constitution, the immigrant experience in America, American women's history, and labor history. We've had him in Focus magazine more than once. And if you go back and look again on our website, you will find some great stuff. Today, however, we're going to tap into his foreign policy expertise and take advantage of his very deep and broad understanding of Turkey and its people, specifically as it relates to the Turkish election and what was apparently to Americans the surprise win of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But maybe it wasn't a surprise. Maybe we were just viewing it through the American prism on Turkey and the Turkish people. So it's with great pleasure, Mark Meirowitz, that we turn to you for expertise and better understanding. And let me start you with a question. What were we missing here? What was going on in Turkey?
Thank you very much, Shoshana, for the privilege of again having the opportunity to present the webinar for Jewish Policy Center and for you and for our participants. The topic of the Turkish election is one that has prompted an enormous amount of speculation and analysis. It's busting the Google numbers. Everybody's interested to know what's the secret to this, because after all, how is it possible President Erdogan won the election? And this is the puzzlement that seems to be prevalent in American media, among American intellectuals, pundits, experts, analysts, and so forth. And I think that the first place I would start is to say that there is an element here of, I'll call it wishful thinking, but actually where these pundits and analysts actually have a predilection, a bias. We know about our biased media when it comes to Israel and so forth, and we read the New York Times, and we know what we're reading is biased. So question is, why is that so? Well, they have a certain element of where they come from and the way they look at it, and the great word that you use, the prism of how to analyze these issues. I will give you one or two good examples of this situation. So first of all, a leading commentator on Turkey, Asli Aydıntaşbaş, who writes for the Washington Post, posted a tweet that has become very famous among Turkish diplomats and others. And this is what she says. Erdogan won But this is not the end of the story. Nearly half of Turkey's voters, 25 million people, the coastline, the educated, the best and the brightest, wanted change and democracy. Let's not lose sight of that. Interesting comment. It reminded me very much of Hillary Clinton's deplorables. Here is the pundit, the expert on Turkish politics, in effect stating that the other 25 million who voted for Erdogan, right, because remember the result was very close, were actually not educated, not the best and the brightest, not sufficiently knowledgeable, and they were failing and so forth. Now then, if you look, for example, at Foreign Policy magazine, I'm not picking on anybody in particular, just because it's interesting. If you look at the, I just put in Turkey in Foreign Policy magazine. I'll just read you the titles of what you get on the page. What if Kılıçdaroğlu wins the election? Rigging the vote won't be easy for Erdogan. Can the Kurds stop Erdogan's bid for power? What happens when a Turkish president loses an election? Nobody knows. This is exactly the material that's been presented by the experts on Turkey. And guess what? If they had bet in Las Vegas, they would have been wrong, because in fact, Erdogan, now it's interesting the way the New York Times did its spin, because after the first election, President Erdogan got 5 more points than the Nations Alliance. I mean, he got about 49.5%, admittedly not enough to win the election outright. But according to New York Times, this was a failure. But if you think about it, it actually really was a victory. I mean, because he won the election, but he didn't quite get enough votes to win it outright, which he did the second time around. The second time around was a close election, but he won. So again, I think there's an element of this analysis among the Western pundits, the American pundits, which suffuses this analysis where candidly, they're not really seeing the election and trying to understand why the Turkish people, despite the economy, despite the earthquake, despite the problems in Syria and refugees, despite all of this, Turkish people still voted to re-elect President Erdogan.
So why?
So this is a very good, interesting question. So everyone can have their own ideas about it, but I will give you my take on it. The reason I think that the Turkish people elected Erdogan really has a lot to do with the idea of what I would say is Turkey matters. Turkey matters in the world. And I think this has largely escaped the cloud that many of our, not to dwell on that too much, but if you think about it, if you go through it, here is what the Turkish people are feeling. They've been written off, and sometimes treated not very warmly by the United States and its leaders. But look at what Erdogan has achieved. Just a few things, right? For example, he brought the grain out of Ukraine, right? He got resources from the Black Sea gas. He was a key player in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And amazingly, and you can make the list a very long list, he is a global interlocutor. In fact, if you look on Twitter and on social media, you will read that the leaders of the world have been falling over each other to congratulate President Erdogan on his victory. That is no simple or unimportant point. Remember, the history of Turkey, going back to its formation of the Republic in the 20th century. All the Western powers wanted to dismember Turkey. They couldn't do it because Ataturk came along, saved the Turkish nation, and venerated by the Turkish people for that. But on and on, from the point of view of Turkish elites looking at America and the West, they don't give us sufficient respect. And I would say, and I always mention this point, and something I've learned, when Turks do a toast, right? Now, I know we in our world, we say l'chaim, to life, but the Turks say sherifed, to our pride. And that is so important. Here is a leader who has been able to be a player. He's a global player. He's a player in the region. He's a player in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, a player in NATO. He has the unique opportunity. What he did is he has not adopted the sanctions against Russia, yet he provides drones to Ukraine, right? And supports the Ukrainian people. No one else has been able to do that. He's had some mediation sessions, so you could make a very long list of things that occurred. Now, of course, the pride factor, I think, is fundamental. There was certainly elements of the election itself that were failures on the part of the opposition coalition, and why I think they lost. In other words, first of all, Turks have not had very good experiences with coalitions historically. That doesn't mean anybody else does. We look around the world, in Israel, elsewhere, and we see coalitions. A bunch of people get together, and then they end up fighting with each other, and that's exactly what it would have happened here. You had a table of six opposition parties, very disparate ideologically, got together on the one unifying point: we got to get rid of Erdogan. That was the glue that kept them together. Now, interestingly, one of their members, Meirowitz, of a very important party, she actually dropped out. She said, I'm rebelling. I don't want to be part of this coalition. She was wooed back into the coalition. But even so, Kılıçdaroğlu, if I read this correctly, said that if I get elected, all of your parties, all of my coalition are going to be equal now. The EE party, which is a significant party, didn't like that idea. So it was a situation which was very fraught. Now, about Kılıçdaroğlu, let me just say a few words about him. Look, he never won an election. Now, why is this important? I mean, I have a student, Turkish student at Maritime, and I asked, what's your opinion of the election? And the answer was, he never won an election. And so, okay, that doesn't mean anything. It's not terrible. But added to the fact that the formidable problems that Turkey is faced with in the world, you can make a list. Syria, not just Syria with refugees, but Syria with the situation with the Kurds, with the Russians, with ISIS. I mean, and of course, Iran and Egypt. And I go on and on. The whole Middle East, the whole world is exploding. And there is Turkey sitting in the middle of Europe and Asia. And it's as my friend, a Turkish diplomat, told me once, we live in a tough neighborhood. And that's true. It's a tough neighborhood. And you have to have leadership skills to negotiate that. Successfully or unsuccessfully, you need a leader to do it. And I think that's where there was a real deficit. Now, just important to understand, what about Kılıçdaroğlu? Now, with Kılıçdaroğlu's coalition lost, in effect, the first election, but they also lost the parliamentary majority. That is crucial. Why? Because one of Kılıçdaroğlu's policy points was, you have a presidential system, the president has too much power, I'm going to change it back to the way it was before, I'm going to have a parliamentary system. In order to do that, you need a supermajority in the Turkish parliament. And the truth is, the Kılıçdaroğlu Nations Alliance didn't get a majority. So that was off the table. Next point was, what about the refugees? Now, I'm just going to say that in all the literature, including the literature by our commentators, they keep on referring to the idea that Kılıçdaroğlu is a great supporter of democracy and freedom. Yet his party put posters up on lampposts that said, Suriyeler gidecek, Syrians out. And there were tweets that said, refugees and asylum seekers out of the country, throw them out. This was part also of one of the minority parties that joined links with him. But can you imagine in the United States, with all the immigration, I'm just saying, it's not comparable, but I'm saying in the United States, can you imagine if all over Texas they took lampposts, or at the on the corner, there'd be posters that said, "Mexicans out of the country." Can you imagine the howling and screaming that would be going on in our system? We wouldn't accept it. And we wouldn't certainly, as one commentator compared Kılıçdaroğlu to Mahatma Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi would have put up signs to throw people out who are living in safety in Turkey after being subjected to the butcher of Assad. I mean, he did it because he thought he could use this strategically to get votes. It didn't really work. It didn't work whatsoever. Now, one other point about Israel, and I want to mention this is very important. You know, we can do, it's Monday morning quarterbacking, but it's this interesting point. What if Kılıçdaroğlu had gotten into office? What would the policy have been towards Israel? Now, we know that President Erdogan has been making some very good forays with dealing with Israel. As a matter of fact, you can read the messages that were sent by Netanyahu and by President Herzog, very warm messages. And in fact, the reaction of President Erdogan reiterating his thanks for Israeli search and rescue following the recent earthquake. Israeli relief to Turkey during the earthquake was momentous. And furthermore, it was recognized by the Turkish people. I look on Twitter, and many Turkish commentators and people, ordinary people, all the flags they listed of all the countries helping Turkey, there's always an Israeli flag. That meant a lot to me. And in fact, Netanyahu said that we want to expand the State of Israel's circle of peace. Warm phone calls, warm. And who would have thought this was possible? This is Kılıçdaroğlu's comments about Israel, albeit not in this particular election. He says, after Mavi Marmara, there is a price for monitoring our citizens in international waters. My message to Israel is that this issue is not closed to us. And then he said that when he visited the family of a Turk who was killed on the Mavi Marmara. As far as Saudi Arabia is concerned, just in terms of being a foreign policy leader, I have a few words to say to bin Salman. Murder on our land also has its price. Our account with him has not been closed. Now, I'm sorry to ruminate on this, but if this is the way, you know, when you're using international relations has to build alliances, not to slam them down. And this kind of rhetoric, I think we didn't know how it would look had he been elected, but the truth of the matter is it was widely ignored in the commentary on Kılıçdaroğlu. So I think it's a combination of Turkish pride and a feeling that Erdogan had leadership skills and that those skills were needed in order to deal with the many momentous issues going forward for Turkey in the region and in the world. And then also the internal issues in the coalition.
So let's look at internal issues, because everything you've said so far is based on what the Turkish people might have seen about Turkey's role in the world and how Turkey maneuvers itself in the world. But inside of Turkey, you have enormous disasters. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that the Turkish lira has hit an all-time low. You have the earthquake.
Can I just pause a minute and just close my window because I'm just very, very noisy.
Yes. And while we let Mark close his window, let me just remind you that we'll be back again, and you can let your friends know that we're doing this. And here he is. So we move back to the program. So what about all of the kind of wreckage? And I would say reverberation, but after an earthquake, that's probably not the most politic word to use. What about the internal issues? Are the Turks really focused outside, or are they worried about inflation and building standards and the lira? Where do they come out on that? And how do they feel Erdogan's doing?
Well, you know, again, this is the idea, you know, James Carville said it's the economy stupid, and everybody thought that with the points you're making, the economy is not doing well. And this is also based on Erdogan's economic theory, which is about interest rates going down, helping the economy, which most financial analysts say is not true. And so I think the question, and of course the earthquake. I mean, the earthquake was a seminal moment for Turkey. Obviously, 50,000 people killed, and of course, questions raised about the standards of the buildings and so forth. Pancaking without support. So that's there. But not to to go back again, and I just say I will quote for a moment something very interesting if I can find it. In the New York Times, actually. It's Bret Stephens, though, so it's not so horrible. But he has an interesting, he talks about trying to understand why this election took place. And he quotes just a Turk who was quoted in The Economist. Why is it that we voted for Erdogan? Well, we love him, said this resident, for the call to prayer for our homes, for our headscarves. And then, interestingly enough, here is the song, which if you watched when President Erdogan was singing on his balcony of his palace, of his office, after he won, this is the song that people were singing. He is the loud voice of the oppressed. He is the free voice of the silent world. He is as he seems, taking his power from the nation. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, man of the people, lover of truth. Now, Americans might scoff at that, but I think it's kind of giving, it's a leap of faith more than anything else. It's clear that the number one issue that Turks are thinking about is the economy and the need to bolster the economy. And the way this was done was previously bolster the economy by bringing in foreign investment from Middle Eastern nations, trying to bolster the economy. The key decision that Erdogan has to make now is who is this going to be his finance minister? And the person that he is considering is Mehmet Şimşek. And Mehmet Şimşek, I think, is, as I understand, is well regarded in the markets, and hopefully, but this is the hope, and that the advice that he gives to President Erdogan on the economy will be listened to. President Erdogan seems to still be stuck on his philosophy of economics, which is not, not a winner and not a good idea. To try to save the economy, and bolstering with foreign investment doesn't really work. So I think the answer is, of course, the Turkish people are preoccupied with their economy, with jobs. That's all about how domestic politics is local. The famous Turkish politician Tip O'Neill coined this idea. All politics is local. It is in Turkey, in the US. So clearly, this is what it's about. Now, there is another election coming up next year in the municipalities in Istanbul, Ankara, and so forth. And the AK party, President Erdogan's party, lost those elections previously after a recount that the AK party requested, and then they lost even worse. That is something that's on his horizon, and obviously does not want to lose that election, wants to win that election back for the AK party. So there's still a lot of things in play, and of course the economy is number one, no question, of course.
Okay, so this does raise two questions. One about the opposition. So did the Turkish people not have any greater faith in the opposition than they did in Erdogan on the economy? Is it possible that neither one of those was going to really satisfy their concerns about their own economic situation? And so they went with the guy that they felt had more leadership skills, number one. And number two question is, was the election fair? No election is completely clean. We know that, not here, not there, not anywhere. But would you say, in your opinion, that the Turkish election was actually fairly run and cleanly run?
Now, to your first point about the coalition, I think in terms of dealing with the economy, and again, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze the voters, but again, with coalition governments are not effective in dealing with really existential crises like the economy is falling apart. and also the faith in Kılıçdaroğlu, having been a Social Security administrator, being able to do this. Now, of course, in the coalition, you had Ali Babacan, was a very minor party, actually ended up with one, I think with one seat. I mean, not significant, but I heard him when he came to New York and he spoke at Bloomberg headquarters to a whole group of financial people here. Very credible guy, very knowledgeable, well-respected in the market. So yeah, they had Babacan, but of course, he would have influence in the coalition's decisions with such a small vote, not necessarily. So it's kind of, I think that the leadership piece was the key, and hopefully that Erdogan can get the right economic advice and make the right economic decisions, which very candidly have not been made and needs to be made urgently, because you can't keep depending on the influxes of foreign investment to bolster you. He's got, he's got Russia. Russia's giving him a lot of benefits where, cheap gas, free gas, all sorts of benefits. And that's not going to go on forever either. Who knows? Russia, to me, is the least reliable, I'm going to call them an ally, although they call each other's dear friends. I think Putin called Erdogan a dear friend or vice versa. Trust me, you do not want to get a hug from the Russian bear. I don't think so. In fact, Russia has fought 17 wars and something like that with Turkey. So with that track record. Now on the elections themselves, look, their turnout on this election was, I think, 80 plus or 90 plus, tremendous turnout. I mean, the Turks were meticulous about making sure that the vote was clean, right? And in fact, I saw, again, this is just, I saw a guy being brought from a hospital in a hospital bed to vote. I saw a lady with a headscarf bringing her lamb to the voting place to vote. A guy showed up dressed as Spider-Man to vote. Even in the United States, we don't do this, but why do they do that? Because they really care about voting. They really care about voting, and I think that on this election, I think the consensus was that it was a free election. Okay, now, just to be comprehensive in terms of where the critics are on this, and the critics have said that this election may have been free, and I think they do agree that it was a free election, no issue there, but they say that it wasn't a fair election, and the reason they say that is because they say that the government controls the media and social media, and then there was something at the first election about some Twitter accounts, Musk being asked to turn down some Twitter accounts, but it turned out that wasn't completely, there were a few, maybe it wasn't a pervasive thing. And I mean, look, here's the truth. The truth is that President Erdogan got more coverage on the national television. That's true, and Kılıçdaroğlu did not. But I mean, I think that the retort, at least of the AK Party, of the People's Alliance, was that he still was out there. And I think that being said, and that being a given, it's a fact that you can't dispute it. It's a fact. But look at the numbers. Look at the numbers. I mean, we're not talking about an election in pure dictatorship where the Soviet Union had 99% of the vote for one candidate. In Turkey, was almost split down the middle. Millions voted for one and millions voted for the other. It was not a landslide on the part of Erdogan at all. Not a landslide. So it looks like the people voted, and this is what the people said. And they were, again, having their views on how they voted. And we always try to analyze in American elections, why do people vote the way they do? But it's a lot of these factors, these ineluctable factors that we talked about. When Erdogan came out, I think it was after the first election this time when he won, he made the comment, it's incredible because it doesn't really fit in our square peg and a square hole for American politics. He said, I'm on the balcony, the other guy's in the kitchen. Huh? Okay, because Kılıçdaroğlu was sitting in his kitchen talking about what a homey guy he is and wonderful things he's going to do to Turkey. And Erdogan's point was, I'm out on the balcony, I'm out there, I'm doing things, okay? So I'm not saying right or wrong. because not my decision, as I'm not a voter in Turkey. It's a question, how do the voters in Turkey feel? And so, and I wanted to mention one other thing that's very important. Where did Erdogan go before the first election, and where did Kılıçdaroğlu go? This is interesting. Where did they go? Sometimes, it's interesting what do politicians do. Well, Kılıçdaroğlu went to Anıtkabir, the mausoleum of Ataturk. Well, it's the Republican People's Party, so showing homage to, of course, one of Turkey's greatest leaders, no question, the father of the Turkish people, no question. But where did Erdogan go? He went to Hagia Sophia, which is a mosque, which used to be, a Eastern Christian, Eastern Orthodox church. I mean, it is now, it was a museum, now it was made into a mosque. I mean, there's a certain significant symbolism in that idea that he wants to resonate with the pious voters, and that it means a lot to them that he is pious. In fact, it is reputed that if people show up and they smoke, he tells them to put out their cigarettes. He doesn't drink. And I said one of the commentators made an interesting point about the mayor of, I don't know if it's true or not, the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, who was going to be a presidential candidate, but then, he was actually accused of insulting the government, so they were going to arrest him and all of that, and that's all going on in Turkey as well. But the commentator said, well, Erdogan doesn't drink, but İmamoğlu does. I don't know if İmamoğlu drinks. I don't know if it's true or not. But the point is, for the pious Turks, this adherence, and his wife, Emine, Erdogan's wife, has a headscarf, and maybe Kılıçdaroğlu's does as well, I'm not sure. But my point is, this resonates with the conservative, pious voters in the heartland of Turkey. And I think, again, and I want to bring up again Asli's point, is that right that only those pious people, I'm going to call them deplorable, those are the people who voted for him, but then the educated, the best and the brightest, they voted for Kılıçdaroğlu? I cannot believe that that's true. Now, one other factor is, of course, the Kurdish vote. Very important. Now, the table of 6 had 6 parties, but it also a party called the HDP, which is a Kurdish party, which President Erdogan said is connected to the PKK terrorists. So his mantra during the campaign was, well, this party, they're terrorists. They are supporting the PKK. So that hurt the coalition a lot. Now, I should mention, for full disclosure, that the People's Alliance of Erdogan is allied with a party called Hudapar, which is the Turkish Hezbollah party. And I mean, I don't know what to say about that, except that, some Turkish friends of mine have made comments about it, and it's befuddling to see that extremism in the party. And
that brings you to an important point, which is Hezbollah being an arm of Iran. You've talked about how Erdogan thanked the Israelis and makes great mention of the relationship at the moment with the Israelis, and nevertheless has a Hezbollah party in his group. What does that tell you about the long term for any of this? How is Turkey's relationship with Iran in the future going to impact its relationship with Israel in the future? If I had to choose one, I know which one I would choose. Which one would Erdogan choose?
Now, about the Turkish Hezbollah, I'm not sure that they are directly linked to the party of God, the Iranian party. I'm not so sure, but they're certainly not on the list that we would put of people we would support or be in favor of. And why that party is there as part of that coalition, because it doesn't really bring much juice to the coalition. The party that brought the juice to the coalition was the MHP, the Nationalist Party. Before I turn to Iran, I did want to mention one thing that which you not mentioned, which is important. In the first election, we had Kılıçdaroğlu, we had Erdogan, but then we also had Sinan Oğan, who was a nationalist, who was a breakaway from the Nationalist Party coalition with Erdogan, which also had an alliance with another party as well, which is Ümit Özdağ. Okay, so that party got 5.2% of the vote. Now, what happened was now we are in the runoff, and the question was like, what are you guys going to do? You're running the country. You're the guy. You're the kingmaker. So interestingly enough, this little alliance, Oman said, I'm going with Erdogan. But then the other partner, Özda, said he's going with Kılıçdaroğlu. And maybe the idea was they wanted to kind of neutralize each other. But that was very, very important to the victory of Erdogan. It added on some additional votes and was very, very important. Now, the subject of Iran, this is a very, very problematic question because, look, Iran and the Turks have been living in the same area for thousands of years. And, their point is, we have to live with these people, but it's a very, very tough situation. Like if you look a little bit at the region, you see very worrisome signs. Now, for example, in Syria, if you remember, the last conference that they had was with Iran and Turkey getting together at a meeting to work out something with Syria. So Iran's projection of its power is significant, added on to the Chinese matchmaking between the Iranians and the Saudis, which was very, very, very bad for the future of the Abraham Accords. So, I think Turkey has a difficult balancing option with Iran. It doesn't want to, it's a neighbor, it doesn't want it to write it off. But on the other hand, it has to contend with it. No question about it. But as far as Iran going forward, I think the key trajectory for Turkey is with Russia and not so much with Iran at the present time. I think the threat there in the Middle East, I don't think it's against Turkey at the present time. Because if you look at the Iranians, as fellow Muslims, they're not officially antagonists, although Iran is a Shiite country and Turkey is Sunni, but at the present time, they're acting not as lovebirds, but as neighbors.
Which may not be the worst thing from our point of view. But you just said something that I got to stop you and ask you to elaborate. So if Turkey's best friend or Turkey's closest partner now appears to be Russia, what does that do to Turkey-American relations? Turkey is a member of NATO, and as you know, you can't dump anybody from NATO without a unanimous vote, which means Turkey has to vote itself out, and it won't. Where does this leave Turkey and the United States?
This is the very formidable question for Turkish-US relations. And it's really, it's on the table right now because of Sweden wanting to accede to NATO. Why the Sweden? Now, in fact, the Financial Times yesterday had a op-ed by the Prime Minister or Premier of Sweden arguing that we need to be in NATO. Now, why? Because it's pushing back against Russia. Sweden and Finland are an essential element of American foreign policy in our ability to push back against Russia in the region and stop them in connection, hopefully, in Ukraine. So this is part of the very befuddling and problematic balancing test that the United States is trying to enter into here to deal with Turkey at the same time as a NATO power when Turkey is actually taking actions or not taking actions that interfere with American foreign policy. Now, where are we right now today? And then we can talk about Russia. Right now, Biden came to the reporters and he said, okay, Turkey's gonna, Sweden will become part of NATO and Turkey will get the F-16s, okay? So nobody had connected it that way before because everybody was saying, gee whiz, it's really not connected, but of course, everything is connected. So the Congress, of course, and that's the fact, has to approve this sale. Now, going back a little bit in history, Turkey went ahead and it acquired the S-400 system from Russia. Now, the reaction I get from Turks is, I always get this reaction, is like, how come Turkey got the S-400, but Greece got an S-300, an S-400, and they get an F-35. How come they get that treatment and we don't get, the same treatment? Now, that's an important thing to understand. So first of all, the S-400 is a smart system. And Turkey was in the F-35 program. That's our super secret stealth fighter. So the point is, if you have the S-400, you can actually, and the Russians, you can actually glean classified and highly secret data from the F-35. So Turkey was thrown out of the F-35 program. Indeed, their pilots were asked to leave the country. And then President Trump placed sanctions on Turkey, which he had to do because the Congress passed a National Defense Authorization Act provision that said they had to be sanctioned. But the sanction that they got was very mild sanction. They sanctioned some office called the Directorate of Defense of the President. No, who knows what this is? I don't know. It is not like sanctioning Russia over Ukraine. It's like not. It's just, it's kind of like a slap on the fingers, but wasn't meant to hurt, but was meant to criticize. And the Senate, if you recall, passed resolutions against Turkey, which were received with a lot of upset in Turkey. But again, the United States took action on this. Now, about the Greece part, which I think is important to keep in mind, there is an imbalance between American foreign policy to Greece and to Turkey. I mean, we do see this. We've seen this historically with Cyprus. The United States put a boycott on Turkey because of Cyprus. I mean, Turkey is a major NATO power. It's the second most significant NATO power, yet it is treated with equivalence to Greece. Now, there's nothing wrong with Greece. I'm all for Greece. Greece is an ally of the United States. But the Turks' view is, well, now you see the things that are going on in the Aegean. They have all these endless disputes over Aegean Sea, and then, of course, Eastern Mediterranean. And we need help on this issue. So that's where we get a big disconnect. And the biggest disconnect is in Congress. In the United States Congress, we have Senator Menendez, who is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who has said, no, he didn't say it exactly like this. No, 1,000, I am not going to approve any of the F-16s for Turkey. And of course, I will approve armaments for Greece. That's the message they get from the Congress. Now, Biden is going to have to finesse this because he basically needs Sweden in NATO. Now, prediction on this, we have the Vilnius summit coming up on NATO in July. And I hope that, that Turkey will, agree to Sweden. It has to be unanimous, agree. I think Hungary is also out there, but I think that one is not the big obstacle. And then they can come to the NATO meeting and then it can be presented as a good NATO member. You can't throw someone out of NATO. You keep hearing this, Turkey's not a good NATO member. They should throw them out. You can't do it. And nor would that be a good policy. I think that's going a retrograde approach. I think the best approach is work with Turkey, try to understand their interests, and try to get the results we need. Now, about the Ukraine war, that one, I think, needs to come to a conclusion, because when we talk about Russia's position, and I think Turkey could actually be an important conduit. I think the United States has used Turkey as a conduit because of its relation with Russia. Because of Turkey's relations with Russia, we can use our good friendship with Turkey to help with policy issues like vexing things like the Ukraine war. This has to be stopped, and President Erdogan could be helpful in order to do that because of his relationship with Turkey. But Sweden's got to come into NATO. Biden said so, and that to me is a key point. Now, as far as Russia going forward, that's a trajectory. It's Robert Frost. I can't think of a better poem than two roads diverge in a wood. Which one am I going to take? Am I going to take the Russian road, or am I going to take the American road? And the truth of the matter is, that's not a choice. The choice is America. The choice is the West, and that has to be the indispensable choice for Turkey. There is no alternative from going with the West. We're longtime allies, Turkey, United States, and we should continue that alliance, and we should stop Russia.
So going back to something that you said a few minutes ago, Greece and Turkey, and how Greece is treated differently from Turkey. And one could say, well, they don't like us because we're Muslim, or they don't like us for the old Ottoman. I don't know. They could say whatever they want. But the fact is that Greece did not occupy Cyprus, and nobody recognizes Turkey's occupation of Cyprus except for Turkey. And Greece doesn't have a relationship with Hamas, which the US doesn't care for. So there are things that Turkey actually chooses to do that Greece hasn't chosen to do. Yes, they did buy Russian air defenses. So how much of this is just Turkey saying, whatever I do, you have to accept it? And how much of it is legitimate American criticism of Turkish policy? And by the way, I'll just add that as far as the Aegean and the Eastern Med,
Right.
energy, Israel has invited Turkey numerous times to join the consortium to talk about how to draw those lines. And Turkey instead drew a border with Libya straight across the Eastern Med, which doesn't work very well, but never mind. So Turkey actually does these things, I think, just to its people, and it works. People get angry.
I was just reading that, the one big dream of Turkey is to have a pipeline, from the Israeli fields and to be able to be an energy conduit, get energy and ship it up to Europe. And I was reading that now Cyprus, the Republic of Cyprus, is trying to make a deal with Israel to basically transship the energy, then LNG it, and then ship it up to Europe. So this is very, very significant. The Eastern Med Forum. The way I see the Eastern Med Forum and I see Cyprus, maybe it's a little bit difficult. The way the Turks see it is like this. In other words, look, I mean, I've spoken to Turkish Cypriots. And again, it depends who you speak to. I didn't check their stories. I'm not a reporter. They say that in the time when Turkey came into Cyprus, they came in. So what they told me, that they came in, they saved the Turkish Cypriots. Now, I didn't check it, I don't know. But the truth of the matter is, there's a great antipathy, and it's very unfortunate. The Greek and Turkish Cypriots should be getting together on that island and live together in peace and in harmony. But the problem that you have, it's sort of like you and your parents are always around. The Greek government and the Turkish government is always around in these negotiations, and they don't allow the kids to talk. And also, the diaspora is very significant. The Greek diaspora, the Cypriot diaspora, does not want a solution. I mean, again, maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but these problems resonate into the Congress as well when it's looking at these issues. The truth of the matter is, if there's an exploration in Eastern Med and it benefits the Republic of Cyprus, it should be shared with the Turkish Cypriots, right? But that has not been the approach. In other words, even on this deal that we're talking about, that they're contemplating, it's always this idea of this antipathy between the two societies. And it is definitely a tremendous level of antipathy, there's no question about it. But a lot of it has to do with the parents, if you wish, the guarantors, Greece and Turkey. And of course, UK is involved too, because UK has bases on Cyprus and Akrotiri and Dekalia. So they're in the mix as well. A lot of Brits live there, and they're huge communities of expats, and they like to live there. So as far as Eastern Med is concerned, I mean, the Eastern Med Forum really coalesced against Turkey. When Turkey went to explore in the Eastern Med, the whole group got together and said, but you can't explore yet. Total and Eni and all these companies had joint venture deals with these countries to do exploration. So Egypt had an MOU with Greece. So Turkey made an MOU with Libya. Now, it's almost like the drawings that my granddaughter makes, in the nursery, where she draws squiggly lines. I mean, these lines, if you look at them, demarcating the lines, they make no sense. They overlap, and there's no way to work a solution with those MOUs. The purpose of the MOUs was to just, on all sides, was to just make the thing stop in place and not have anybody have any rights to the resources. And that's awfully stupid, because there is a big energy need in the world and in the region. So they have to get together and do that. And I think that the warming relations between Israel and Turkey, to my mind, will be helpful, hopefully, to thaw that out a little bit and maybe work up a deal. But again, optimism, doesn't always work.
We need optimism, because we're coming to the end of our program.
Okay.
And as people who listen to us know, I like to go out on an optimistic note. So let's take your thought that the energy conversation could turn out to be a positive construct for the region. Give us one more optimistic thought about Turkey's future. And then we can close on a happy note.
All right. Well, I thought I said happy things all along. I thought there were a lot of good things, and I was saying, I do agree with you on the energy. That is really crucial. I'm hopeful, and this is not happy or sad. I'm hopeful that the relationship between United States and Turkey does not become a transactional relationship where we make quid pro quo deals. Okay, I'll give you F-16s. You agree to Sweden joining NATO. That is not a deep friendship between allies. And I think that Biden's call, Biden's reach out to Erdogan was a good thing. I think that the United States is going to think about doing things better going forward. And so Turkey has to as well, to make that relationship a better relationship. And why? Well, there's the imperative of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. So again, I have to be optimistic that the leading powers in the world, including Turkey, will understand the need to stop that aggression. We didn't talk about China at all, but obviously the rising China and its influence in the region, all of these things are formidable issues in which, and I think positively, US and Turkey can work together and hopefully forge solutions. Where I am very optimistic, and as a happy note, is on the Israel-Turkish relationship. I think that has been moving along in a very good way. I think the optics and the environment and the feelings are very good, very good. And I hope that they will continue to prosper. The trade between the two countries is a big, deficit on the side of Israel, Israel versus Turkey. Let's get more trade, more tourism, more interactions, and obviously the energy piece is going to be very important as well. And interacting in this way. The Israeli relief to Turkey was very, very important and great. The story of the Israeli soldier telling about how he received a coin from a Turkish family, thanking the Israelis for saving their child. And they said, this is what we do when our child is born. We thank the person who helped deliver our child. I mean, gee whiz. I mean, that's important. So more person-to-person contacts, more good relations between Turkey and Israel, I think will be good for Turkey and Israel, and also will help Turkey with its relations with the United States.
So on that note, thank you for an optimistic end to the program, but thank you really for showing us sort of what's going on in Turkey and what they care about and what they vote on and how they do it. I do think occasionally that we get caught up in the American prism, and this was very helpful. So Mark Meirowitz, thank you for joining us. To everybody out there, see you soon.
Thank you so much.